Malik Turner used to think the city was alive. When he was small, he would sit on the front steps of the duplex on McGraw and watch the buses pass, the lights flickering over wet pavement, the whole world rumbling by in second-hand cars and tired laughter. His mother worked nights at a nursing home, leaving him with neighbors who smoked and argued, but always brought him back before sunrise. He liked waiting for her shadow in the doorway, the soft clatter of keys, the smell of disinfectant and peppermint gum. "You still up, baby?" she'd whisper, and he'd pretend to be asleep so she could kiss his forehead without worry. Those were the safest moments he ever knew. When he was 9, the nights started lasting longer. His mother began missing shifts. Sometimes she would hum too loud, eyes glassy, hands trembling as she cooked noodles. He didn't know the word addiction then. He just knew that the house filled with strangers who stayed until morning. One evening he came home from school and found the front door wide open, the TV still buzzing. He waited until dark. A neighbor finally called someone, and 2 women in state jackets arrived with clipboards. "We're here to help," they said. Malik asked if they'd found his mom. They said, "We're still looking." He rode in the back of their car past the old church, clutching his backpack like a secret. The first foster home smelled of onions and bleach. Mr. Bryant kept the windows locked even in summer. "You kids eat too much," he'd mutter, counting slices of bread. Malik learned to hide food under his pillow. At night, he traced cracks in the ceiling and imagined his mother walking through the door to take him home. After 3 months, the Bryants told the agency they couldn't handle another behavioral case. He didn't know what that meant, but he packed fast when the social worker arrived. "You'll like the next place better," she promised. He didn't believe her, but he nodded. The next house had 6 children and 2 bunk beds. The foster mother, Ms. Joe, ran the place like a small factory. Chores at 6, breakfast at 7, lights out at 9. She wasn't cruel, just tired. She called Malik number 4 because she couldn't keep the name straight. He went to school smelling of dish soap and old carpets. A teacher asked why he never brought lunch money. He said he forgot. Sometimes she'd slip him crackers and apples. Those small kindnesses were the only proof he still mattered. Every new home brought new rules. No talking after dinner. No friends over. No crying. By 12, Malik stopped unpacking his bag. He kept everything folded inside, 2 shirts, a pencil, a drawing pad, so he could leave at a moment's notice. Drawing became his refuge. He sketched faces from memory. His mother's smile, the neighbor's dog, a classmate who once lent him a pencil. The paper gave him something solid when people kept vanishing. His caseworker changed 3 times in 2 years. The latest one, Ms. Clark, seemed kind but overwhelmed. "We'll find you someplace stable," she said each visit, tapping on her tablet. He wondered if stable was a real word or just another promise grown-ups used when they didn't know what else to say. When Malik turned 14, he landed in a home on the west side with the Hensons. They were older, quieter, with a house full of framed photos and gospel music on Sundays. Mrs. Henson gave him new shoes. Mr. Henson taught him to change spark plugs in the garage. "Work with your hands and you'll never go hungry," the man said. For a few months Malik let himself believe he'd finally found a place. He joined the school art club, started saving for sketch pencils, even brought home a report card that said excellent effort. Mrs. Henson stuck it on the fridge. He stared at it every morning like proof that he existed. Then the agency reduced stipends for teens. One night after dinner, he overheard the Hensons arguing in the kitchen. "We can't keep covering the cost ourselves," Mr. Henson said. "He's almost grown. Let the state handle it." Malik sat on the stairs, heart pounding. The next morning Ms. Clark arrived with a folder and that same practiced smile. "Good news," she said. "You're moving to transitional housing. It's a step toward independence." Independence felt like punishment. Mrs. Henson hugged him awkwardly at the door. "You're a good boy," she said, not meeting his eyes. He left the framed report card on the fridge because it no longer felt like his. The group home downtown was a crumbling brick building that once held offices. The paint peeled, the hallway cameras blinked red, the air always smelled faintly of damp laundry. No fighting, no drugs, no visitors, the supervisor barked. The other boys were older, some loud, some silent. Malik learned fast to keep his head down. He spent nights sketching on his bunk, headphones in, blocking out the shouting from the next room. Ms. Clark visited once a month, always in a hurry. "You doing okay?" she'd ask. He'd shrug. She'd nod, already packing her bag. "You'll age out soon. We'll get you resources." He wanted to ask what resources meant, but the words never came. At school, he blended into the background. Teachers praised his art but scolded his attendance. He wanted to tell them he had to take the bus across town, that sometimes the pass expired, that sometimes he just couldn't face the stairs when classmates asked where he lived. Instead, he smiled and said, "I overslept." Nobody pushed further. When winter hit, the heat in the group home broke. They slept in jackets until someone donated space heaters. Malik spent lunch hours in the art room to stay warm. His teacher, Mr. Walsh, noticed his sketches, portraits of city blocks, strangers waiting for buses, faces that looked both ordinary and sacred. "You've got an eye," Walsh said. "Apply to the Arts Magnet Program." Malik filled out the form, but never mailed it. He didn't know where he'd be living by the deadline. On his 17th birthday, the staff gave him a cupcake with one candle. "Almost out of here," one of the boys joked. Aging out was supposed to sound exciting, freedom, independence, but Malik saw it for what it was, another eviction. The system celebrated releasing kids it hadn't raised. That night, he drew the candle melting, wax dripping into darkness. Beneath it, he wrote one more year. Summer came with promises that never reached him. He took a part-time job washing dishes at a diner, paid cash under the table. The cook, a big man named Theo, let him keep leftovers. "You're quiet, kid," Theo said once. "Keep your head straight. Don't let the streets eat you." Malik smiled. He didn't say that the streets were already nibbling at the edges of him. Ms. Clark stopped visiting in July. The office said she'd been reassigned. No replacement came. The boys joked that they were free now, but the laughter sounded brittle. When the funding cycle ended, the home closed with 2 weeks' notice. "Find relatives or friends," the director said. "We don't have beds after the 15th. Malik packed his bag, the same one he'd been carrying since childhood, and waited for someone to tell him what to do next. No one did. The last night before closing, he climbed to the roof and looked out over the city. Streetlights flickered like scattered fireflies. From up there, Detroit looked peaceful. Factories sleeping, cars sliding through rain, the river glinting like steel. He imagined his mother somewhere beyond it, maybe sober, maybe not, but breathing under the same sky. "You still up, baby?" he whispered into the wind, the way she used to. The city didn't answer. Morning came with paperwork. They gave him a prepaid phone, a duffel bag, and a pamphlet titled Steps to Independence. A social worker he'd never met drove him downtown. "You can call hotlines if you need shelter," she said, eyes on traffic. He nodded, pretending to listen. When she dropped him off outside a youth center and wished him luck, he watched her car disappear around the corner, leaving him standing between two boarded-up buildings. Independence had arrived. He checked into a temporary shelter that afternoon, a converted church basement with 20 cots and a line that stretched down the block. The coordinator, a woman named Mrs. Green, took his name. "You from Foster?" she asked. He nodded. "Figures. We get a lot of you kids." She meant it kindly, but it felt like a curse. That night, he lay awake listening to snores and coughs and rain tapping the windows. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed, then faded. He clutched his sketchbook to his chest, afraid someone might steal it. It was the only thing that proved he was still a person. For the next months, he balanced school, the diner job, and the shelter's curfew. Some nights, he missed the cutoff and slept at the bus terminal instead. He stopped drawing as much. His pencils wore down to nubs. When a volunteer asked about his future, he said, "I'm working on it," even though he didn't know what that meant anymore. Autumn crept in, cold and uninvited. The city's trees turned red, then brown, then bare. Malik watched his breath fog in the morning light as he walked to the diner. The cook's jokes no longer landed. "You okay, kid?" Theo asked once. Malik shrugged. "Just tired." The man pressed a $5 bill into his palm. "Get yourself something warm." Malik smiled, pocketed the money, and bought sketch paper instead. He started a new series, faces of people at the shelter, the bus drivers, the woman who swept the sidewalks before dawn. Each drawing looked more fragile than the last, as if the pencil itself were losing hope. When Mrs. Green saw them, she said, "You got talent. You should show these." He promised he would, but he knew there was no gallery for kids like him. Winter was coming, and with it the end of shelter funding. Rumors spread that beds would be cut again. "We'll figure it out," Mrs. Green said, though her voice wavered. Malik tried not to panic. He'd survived worse. Still, he kept his bag packed at the foot of his cot. Old habits die hard. By Christmas, the temperature dropped below freezing. The shelter filled beyond capacity. Volunteers turned people away at the door. Malik spent his nights working extra shifts at the diner and napping in the break room when the manager wasn't looking. On New Year's Eve, Theo gave him a leftover slice of pie. "New year, new start," the cook said. Malik nodded, though he knew calendars didn't change anything. At midnight, fireworks popped outside. He watched them through the greasy window and whispered, "Still here." That was the last calm night before everything shifted again. In January, the diner cut hours. Malik lost his job. The shelter funding ran out for real this time. Mrs. Green hugged him goodbye. "You'll find your way," she said, tears shining in her eyes. He wanted to believe her. Instead, he stepped out into the cold with his bag and sketchbook, the city's wind howling like an open mouth. The cold that January did not let up. Detroit's streets froze in layers, buses groaned up snow-choked hills, and Malik learned that breath could sting. He walked until his shoes cracked and salt stained the cuffs of his jeans. Each morning, he stopped at the library to warm his hands over the radiator, pretending to read the classifieds. When the guards asked him to move along, he thanked them and stepped back into the wind. He had no anger left, only fatigue that settled into his bones like dust. He found a rhythm. Library, diner dumpsters, bus station, underpass. When the world closed its doors at night, he drew by the light of street lamps, sketching whatever stayed still long enough. A stray cat, a broken mailbox, his own reflection in a store window. He no longer dated the pages. Time felt circular, each day looping into the next. He wrote small notes beside the drawings. "Still here. Keep breathing. Maybe spring." One afternoon, he met a boy his age named Daryl outside a soup kitchen. Daryl wore 2 coats and a grin that didn't match the weather. They traded stories over plastic bowls of chili. Both had been system kids, shuffled around until the paperwork ran out. That night, they shared a spot under an awning and watched the river lights. Daryl dealt cards on a flattened box. "Ever think about leaving the city?" he asked. Malik smiled faintly. "Where would I go?" They laughed, not because it was funny, but because laughter warmed them for a second. Days turned into weeks. They moved together like shadows, careful and quiet. Daryl scavenged scrap metal for cash. Malik sketched portraits for coins. People passed them with quick glances or speeches about staying strong. A woman once dropped $1 and said, "God helps those who help themselves." Malik whispered, "Then I guess he's tired." They both laughed again, the sound thin against the wind. By February, shelters were beyond capacity. Rumors spread that outreach vans had stopped running in certain neighborhoods. One night, Malik and Daryl tried the emergency intake downtown, but the guard at the door shook his head. "Full. Try again tomorrow." They walked away without speaking. Tomorrow had stopped meaning anything. Daryl caught the flu first. He lay coughing beneath the overpass, body curled tight. Malik shared what food he had, pressed a damp cloth to his friend's forehead. Hospital, he said. Daryl shook his head. No insurance, no ID. They'll just call the cops. In the morning he was gone. Not dead, just gone. His backpack missing, footprints leading toward the freeway. Malik searched for 2 days before accepting he'd lost another person. He drew Daryl's face from memory and taped it to a concrete pillar, the wind flapping the paper like a flag. After that, the silence grew heavier. He spoke less, ate less, moved slower. He spent one bright afternoon sketching the skyline from a hill behind an abandoned school. The drawing looked almost hopeful until he noticed he'd forgotten to include himself. He tore the page out, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the back of the book. The next morning, he left the city limits on foot, wandering toward the industrial district where no one asked questions. The factories there stood hollow, windows punched out, graffiti shouting across the walls. He found shelter in an old loading dock, dry enough to sleep. For days, he lived on vending machine snacks and melted snow. He stopped checking his phone. The battery had died long ago. When the hunger became too sharp, he drew food, bread, apples, steaming bowls, until the lines blurred. Each sketch looked almost real in the dim light. Late one night, a storm rolled in. Wind screamed through the gaps in the metal doors. He wrapped himself in his coat, closed his eyes, and thought of the Henson's kitchen. The smell of gospel music and cornbread. The report card still taped to their fridge. He wondered if it was still there. He tried to picture his mother, too. Not the last version with glassy eyes, but the one who smelled of peppermint gum. He whispered her name once, then drifted into a sleep that felt wider than rest. Morning came gray and silent. A city worker doing inspections found the loading dock door ajar. Inside, a sketchbook lay open on a crate, pages trembling in the wind. On the final page was a drawing of the river, frozen mid-flow, and underneath 4 words in faint pencil, "We were here once." No one knew how long it had been since the boy had last moved. The worker called it in, voice low, respectful. By the time officials arrived, snow had begun to fall, covering everything in quiet mercy. News of the discovery reached no headlines. There were other crises, louder ones, and one more homeless teen was a line already written too many times. At the youth center, Mrs. Green kept his name on the intake sheet, just in case he ever came back. Theo at the diner asked around for a few weeks, then stopped. The system marked his file, closed, aged out. The city kept breathing. Spring eventually returned to Detroit. Grass pushed through cracked sidewalks. The river thawed. Kids played basketball on the same corner where Malik used to stand. Sometimes a piece of paper would blow past, a grocery receipt, a flyer, or maybe one of his sketches carried by the wind. No one could tell. But if you looked closely near the old loading docks, you could still see faint pencil lines on the wall. Faces half erased by rain, eyes that refused to close. They watched the city without accusation, only the quiet insistence of remembrance. Mrs. Green organized a small service months later. No official body, no paperwork, just candles and a photo she'd found among donations. A grainy image of a thin boy smiling at the camera, sketchbook tucked under one arm. She read a short prayer. "One of ours," she said simply. The volunteers nodded. When the candles burned out, the room filled with the smell of wax and coffee, and everyone went back to serving soup. Years passed. Detroit kept changing. New condos, new slogans, the same old wind. Sometimes art students painting murals downtown spoke of an anonymous sketchbook found near the river. They called the artist the boy who drew hope. They never knew his name, but the drawings remained in a local shelter office, pinned to a bulletin board. Every now and then, a kid newly placed in foster care would stop to stare at them. "He could really draw," they'd say, and someone would answer softly, "He really lived." The river still moved. carrying reflections of towers and clouds. If you walked its edge at dusk, you might see the faint outline of a bench where a boy once sat sketching the world he wanted to believe in. The city didn't remember him, but the wind did, whispering through broken windows, brushing across the pages he left behind, repeating the only sentence he ever finished. We were here once. Thanks for watching.